All right, we're live. Excuse me, burp. Right as we go live. Hello, we're live. I'm Christiana Ellis,
And I'm Mike Mateen.
and we're going to talk about Survivor, the Ghost Island finale. Those of you watching this will already know, but I titled this "Talking About Survivor, Ghost Island Finale Finally." So just due to coincidentally inconvenient schedule alignments, we were not able to record for the Talking About Survivor finale until now. But here we are to finally discuss what I thought was one of the better finales in a long time. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I thought it was really, really good, if I remember correctly.
Yes. And I am suddenly realizing I don't have my notes prepared because they're not in the normal place because I recorded them elsewhere. Hang on just a second. This is embarrassing. I forgot that I didn't have my notes in Evernote where I usually would. Okay, but yes, I let's see. I do remember, other than having my notes for details, I remember thinking that it was a great finale. And even though it pretty much played out as we predicted, there were several surprising details nonetheless. Let's see. I don't have... Okay, I think I remember that I put my notes... Because the issue was this, is that I had to watch the finale on the road in Baltimore, and I took notes on my laptop instead of on Evernote like I would do at home. And so notes not in the expected place. But I actually have a note in my Evernote folder called Survivor Ghost Island Finale, and so that's why I was kind of saying, well, I assume that's it. But nope. So let's see. I'm sorry, I have to find it. But how about this? Did you talk about it for a second while I look for that?
All right. Well, I guess I wouldn't say it came out exactly the way we planned, and that the final vote was closer than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
Still, ultimately, the winner that I figured, but also a good winner.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was happy that Wendell ended up being the person who won for all the reasons that we talked about. I mean, they had set themselves up to basically dominate this game, and every time that someone had a chance to get rid of them, they didn't do it. And this is the price that you pay when that happens.
Yeah, indeed. And I think it was ultimately very satisfying in a number of ways. First, I liked that it was so close to begin with. I liked that because I really felt like both were interesting, but then the deciding factor essentially coming down to a vote that, we had talked, it's like, well, it's working on a vote. Is it going to be loyalty there? Bringing someone along for loyalty? Is that a good idea? Is that a smart thing? Well, as it turns out, I mean, we don't know what would have happened the other way, but the deciding vote was cast by someone who was the recipient of that loyalty and appreciated it.
Right, because we never would have known had it gone the other. Had Laurel just been on the jury instead of somebody else, would she have made it a 6-4 instead of a 5-5? Like, we don't know that he wouldn't have just won outright, but yeah. Mike. And it was interesting because I wasn't even aware that this was how the tiebreaker had happened. I mean, because it's
I don't think it had ever happened before.
Yeah, it's never been necessary. Yeah.
All right, so I am stunned by my lack of preparation and being unable to pull up my normal notes. I'm glad we're sort of able to talk about it. No, why is it doing this? Because I think it's on my computer, but Uh, don't. Okay, I think.
Yeah, if I keep talking, I'm just going to end up covering all the big moments, and then we'll be done.
Wow. Yeah. So, I mean, in some ways, especially because it's been a while, if I eventually get my notes, we can do more of a scene by scene thing. But I mean, ultimately, since it's been a few weeks, I think mostly what we want to talk about anyway is the highlights, right? And we can, go back and relitigate how it got there in a few places, but mostly, I think. I think it sounds like we're on the same page in the sense that I think. Well, okay. So here's a question for you. You could certainly when you have two really powerful players like that. The idea of them going to the end together is certainly something that's rewarding for the audience, right? And so I think it's just kind of a question of. We were talking about the will they, won't they, in terms of if either Dom or Wendell has a choice to either bring the other to the end or not, what would they do? And then for it to turn out that they sort of mutually understood that, like, oh no, well, why would we do that? That would be silly.
Yeah. So, is this 4-3, scenario the way that it's going now? Is that new? Or did that happen recently?
No, I'm pretty sure that was new. I don't think they've done it that way before.
Yeah, I don't remember having seen that, where there isn't
right.
a vote that the winner just chooses who stays and who competes.
Well, right. So specifically what what has been the case before is that you end up having like a one vote tribal council, right? Like, but whoever's like the one person who gets to pick or something like that. Like they've done, I think, similar things like that. But the idea of there will definitely be a fire making challenge regardless of who's voting for who. Right? Like that, I don't think has ever happened before.
Yeah. And I think that was probably the greatest addition to this game with all the things that they inputted.
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
Sorry.
Aha! I found my notes.
Okay. Good.
All right. I typed them into a Word document on my laptop and then never copied it over into Evernote. But I have it now. So, but to finish what we were talking about there, I think that was pretty interesting, especially just because, first of all, the fire making challenges are always kind of fun and suspenseful to watch. But also, it means that even when it's obvious that one person would have been the one to go, they still have a chance.
Right. That's why I think this was the best addition to the game, because no longer can you have two strong allies get into the final four and whoever wins the immunity eliminates the other one so they don't have to compete against them.
Mm-hmm.
Because that person, they can put them into the fire making challenge like Dom did, which was the right thing to do. But you can't eliminate him. So if your other strong player can make fire, then you still have to compete against them at the end. And I really like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they keep that up in the future, now you have to start thinking about, do you really want to go to the end with this person? Because you can keep saying, oh, we're going to go to the end, and you know that you're going to get rid of them, but everybody keeps up the pretense that you're going to go to the end together. Yeah. That way, in case you're not the one who wins immunity at the end, you can be like, hey, we're going to the end together, right?
Uh-huh.
When that never happens, or it shouldn't, it has happened, and people have lost because of it. But this now, if that if this gets instituted, then you can't ever guarantee that you can get rid of that person then. So now you have to start thinking, do I turn on them earlier? Or do I need to take them all the way into that final four? And if they end up against me, hopefully I can beat them.
Right.
I like
certainly,
that.
Yeah, I agree completely. I kind of like it a lot, but I would, you're definitely not wrong. I found in my notes, I specifically have rule change ? And just, yeah, they definitely changed that segment up. It also kind of re-emphasizes the idea that they really all should be making a proactive attempt to know how to make fire. Nobody has any excuse to not know how to make fire. That said, I can imagine, and I think we maybe talked about this in a previous episode, that it could happen where you have every intent to do fire making on a semi-regular basis. Like maybe you practiced a little bit at home, but then you want to practice there with the actual stuff that they have, and you want to help maybe make fires at camp. But then if someone kind of gets assigned fire duty, and because you're not assigned fire duty, you're assigned some other thing at camp, the fact that you want to practice making fire, I don't know, like it might not necessarily be trivial. But on the other hand, because like if they have like a limited amount of flint, I don't know. Actually, that occurs to me. That's been a thing in past seasons where they like lost their flint, but I don't know if they just get another one. I would think they probably do. It's like once a tribe has like earned fire, I think they probably just are provided what's necessary.
Yeah, because nobody's ever run out of flint.
Not in a long time anyway. I mean, I feel like there was a past season where there was an issue where someone lost the flint or hid the flint. I can't remember the details.
Yeah, that's very different though than like using all the flint, which we've never seen happen.
Right.
So yeah, you could definitely, and I don't think anybody would, I mean, no one should be angry at you if like during the times when you're sitting around, you're like, hey, I'm going to practice making fire in case I'm ever the one that has to do it at camp, as opposed to like, because I want to make it to the end and not be able to get, say, hey, I want to make sure that we're all able to do it. So I'm going to practice and make sure. Like, I don't think anybody, especially if you can't use up all the flint, then there's plenty of downtime. Everybody should be spending their time learning how to do it.
Yeah, definitely. And it's all the more now, given that it's not always now, it's not just going to be a backup thing. It's going to be like, assuming that they keep it, which I think they should, honestly. Yeah. I really liked it. So now that I have my notes, would you like to jump back to the beginning and kind of go through?
Sure.
Hit the high points. So as we began the finale, we get the little montage for each person where the editors of the show kind of sum up their take on the narrative for each. And but I had my own little notes during that segment of Sebastian is a likable goof whose only real asset remaining is his extra vote. Donathan is dropping truth bombs to stir things up. Laurel is solid, but has just been tagging along, playing it safe. Angela has also been tagging along, but now a swing vote. Wendell, cool but confident, has an idol. Dom, unpredictable but passionate, has an idol and a fake idol. That's pretty much how things stood at the beginning of the finale. And we sort of began the episode proper discussing Donathan's declaration of war, which I think both in hindsight and based on what we had discussed previously, really amounted to Donathan just kind of throwing up his hands and saying, well, fine, Laurel, if you're not going to help me take out one of these guys, then I just am going to be forced to get desperate and swing for the fences with anything I've got. because playing it safe from here on out is going to result in Dom or Wendell winning.
Yes.
It might anyway, but at least you could try.
Yes. I mean, it's the thing that we talked about is that they should have. I mean, I know you could feel bad that Wendell, did actually finish the challenge first and all that. You should have got rid of him.
Yep. And he would have understood too.
He would have understood.
In your place, he would have done it.
Absolutely would have. And then, I mean, I know that it changes the calculation, but obviously because Wendell won the next immunity, but Dom was available on the next immunity, and obviously the way if you had gotten Wendell, you can't guarantee that Dom would have been available. But the same thing, you could have had that worked out. You could have knocked them both out.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a game story when you go into the end. If you're part of that coalition and you can make it all the way to the end and maneuver that and say, yeah, these two were going to win the game. And hey, Wendell, I feel bad that, you finished the puzzle first, but you didn't complete the challenge.
Yeah.
And that's part of the deal. You slipped and we took you out, and then we took out your partner, and now we're here and you're not, and that would earn some votes. That would at least earn their 2 votes.
Sure.
So it's so silly to watch this, like, again, armchairing it, but to watch, Donathan just like flare his hands up. It's like, these guys are going to win. These guys are going to win. And Laurel just being like, well, maybe not. It's like, no, not maybe not.
Well, and the fact is too that Laurel by the end was kind of going, oh crap, I guess, yeah, well, too late now, I suppose, but
yeah,
damn, yeah, well,
at least I made final 3. I mean, cool. I made final 3. Yay, good for you, Laurel.
Whereas it seems fairly clear that Angela was sort of playing for number 3 for a while, and then just due to the rule change ended up at 4 instead.
And the funny thing is that the way that it all worked out, like, Angela might have had a shot at getting some votes had she beat Wendell in the fire-making challenge. Yeah,
well, she could have leveraged that at least, right?
Right. Yeah. I think she would have peeled off some votes for people who felt like Dom only got there because of Wendell or something like that,
right. But yeah, I mean, I think, like the jury is looking at Dom, Wendell, and Laurel, and they're kind of looking at Dom and Wendell, and then at Laurel, and then at Dom and Wendell, and then at Laurel, and saying, Laurel, we here on the jury have watched for several weeks now while you failed to eliminate these 2 guys who seemed like obvious threats. So, I mean, you seem nice, but
yeah, your biggest asset to this game was helping them get to the end.
Yeah.
That doesn't win it for you.
Right. And even if you want to make the case that you were heavily involved in some of those strategic discussions, and to some extent that's true, they're going to say, but your strategy led to them winning. So, like, even if you were involved, it seemed like the end result of your strategy was bringing 2 extremely powerful threats to the end with you. Why is that a good strategy? It's a good strategy for them, and for them to convince you to help them do that. Yep. I mean, I don't want to be too hard on Laurel, but I mean, I think you and I are on the same page, and certainly as Donathan was, in the sense of saying 2 votes ago was the time to make the move, and you didn't, and I was frustrated, and so now I am going to do whatever I can, but it's probably too late, and you're going to find out at the end that it was too late, and she did. But back when there's still 6, I have a note here. Sebastian frustrated that he's getting left out of decisions, and he phrases it, I'm a big boy too. And it's kind of like, yeah, but you that develops over time, right? Like you can't sort of recognize, hey, people are leaving me out of decisions. And then you kind of pout about it? I don't know. I mean, I don't want to be hard on Sebastian either. because I mean, my sort of sum total on him, I think, is that he seems like a really nice, fun guy who is just not necessarily a good Survivor player. And that's fine. I think he made it this far by being so likable and non-threatening that nobody ever felt like they needed to get rid of him.
Right. I mean, that's part of the problem. Not the problem. I mean, it was still incredibly interesting, like, into it. But to that point, it's Wendell and Dominic made sure to eliminate everybody who was good at Survivor, and they had people who were bad at Survivor helping them. So they end up with people who aren't that good at Survivor left against them, and hoping that they can somehow stumble their way into victory. And that just doesn't. That's not a good strategy.
And so we have Dom, Wendell, and Laurel specifically discussing that Donathan is not really a real threat to win, because he's been kind of so chaotic that they don't think he's going to be able to get any jury votes. I don't know. I think he's certainly wouldn't get a lot, but I don't think it's that extreme. Whereas Sebastian could theoretically get, nice guy votes, right?
Yeah.
So that's why they're saying, he should go next. And then Dom and Wendell are specifically talking about, like, they're at 6 and they're saying, if you or I win immunity this time, they're both completely safe for final 3. Now, we know that it actually ends up being more complicated than that because of the change to the way 4-3 went. But that seemed to presume that at that point they were talking about still going to the end together.
Well, even with the vote change, if they really wanted to, they could have ensured that they were in the final 3 together, because it could have been Laurel and Angela make fire against each other.
Right. Well, I think it was also maybe less a matter of they wanted to go to the end together so much as if they both have idols.
Yeah, but idols can't get you 3.
Well, right. But they could.
The only way to ensure you go to 3 is you have to decide to take each other.
Yeah.
So that didn't have to do with the rule change.
Okay. So I don't know. It was kind of complicated. The rule change kind of twisted it around. In any event, though, the immunity challenge at this point was the giant skull maze, the big production one that they do every year, and I liked it. It was interesting that there were very few overlaps between the two, the different mazes, right? Like they each had their own little colored maze section that only linked up at the bag stations. I thought that was interesting that they're each doing their own maze separate from the others.
Yeah, instead of always crossing over each other and stuff like that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I thought that was neat, although it made me just think how that seems like it would make it more difficult to have each maze segment be fair. You know what I mean? Like even with each other. I mean, right. I suppose you could do it. I'm sure there's ways, but I just, if everybody's running the same maze, then it's definitely fair. Whereas if each person is running their own maze that are not necessarily identically shaped because of the overall skull shape, I don't know. It's fine. I wasn't complaining so much as just it made me wonder about it.
Yeah, I'm sure, though not exact, they ran some calculation to ensure that they were all the same length.
Yeah.
Of total space. Well, of course, that doesn't matter 100% in a maze. At least equalizes it a little bit.
Well, and it also may have been a maze where ultimately to get all of the bags, you have to essentially run all the paths. You know what I mean? Like it may be less of a maze and more of a 3 paths that kind of go back and forth and all of that sort of thing. Right?
Oh, yeah.
So it may not be a maze that you get lost in so much as just a maze where you have to keep running around and changing directions and stuff.
Right. And therefore, if they're all 3 the same length, then they are fairly equal.
Yep.
Yep.
And then the puzzle at the end looks pretty hard. Although all I have in my notes is tough looking puzzle. I don't really recall exactly what that one was.
It was like a vertical thing.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah, the one where sort of the 3-dimensional piece where it's stacked. Right. I remember that. But in any event, this is where we end up with Sebastian starting the puzzle with a big lead, but just doesn't have the puzzle chops compared to Dom and Wendell. And then when they pull up to the end, we have a very satisfying Wendell yelling out, "Jeff Probst! What? I think I'm done, bro." I just loved that. It's like he's very, being very clear about calling Jeff over this time.
It was really funny.
Yeah, and Probst obviously reacting to that too. Saying what, but with kind of a grin of like, yes. So that was fun. So he gets the steak dinner, and he's able to bring 2 people with him. He picks Sebastian to repay the favor, and Angela to share the wealth a little bit. And to my mind, this was clear, jury favor currying, right? Like he's saying these 2 are on their way out, and I'm going to try to make them like me more.
Yeah.
Whereas, the others are my primary competition right now.
Yep.
Yeah. And then here's where Laurel questions the stated reasoning, and she's right to do so because the stated reasons were kind of arbitrary. And she's saying she's annoyed that Wendell's choosing her enemies to get rewards. She doesn't like her alliance anymore. And the gloves are off now. And then in my notes, Laurel, the gloves are off now. Me, you're too late. There is nothing you can do anymore.
You let it go too long.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It's always a thing in Survivor of knowing when to make your move, because it definitely is possible to make a move too soon. We've seen that. Arguably, Desiree maybe made that mistake this season, right?
Yep.
But in this case, no. I think she and Donathan were kind of on the same page for a couple of weeks, where they were saying, "Nope, not yet, not yet, not yet," and then Donathan said, "Okay, now," and Laurel said, "Nope, not yet," and now it was too late. Let's see. Wendell's feeling great about his place in the game at this point. He should. And he explicitly points out that he's hoping to curry favor with Sebastian before sending him to the jury. And to Angela and Sebastian, on the reward, he says that Donathan's going to be the target. And this is where we have the charmingly naive Sebastian talking about, well, it's good to have Donathan go in the short term, but I'm concerned about Dom and Wendell's resumes. And I'm thinking, really? Yeah? Yeah. No, that's a good point, Sebastian.
Yes, I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and again, I continued to harp on Laurel quite a bit in my notes here. Laurel complains to Dom about Wendell's choices. She has really good points, except for the fact that she has taken a long time to come to that point. And Dom kind of tries to make excuses for Wendell, but he's picking up on the idea that Laurel is frustrated now. She kind of sees the writing on the wall. Donathan thinks he is actually the target. Talks with, Angela is talking with Sebastian and Donathan. They're talking about idols. Maybe they can try to get Dom out. Sebastian mentions his extra vote, which is helpful for them because they're thinking if the three of them plus Sebastian's extra vote could all vote together, then they don't need Laurel, which they see as a positive because they don't feel like they can trust her to do that. And then I was like, could they make it seem like Laurel is the target to try to get Dom to play his idol on her instead? But then Angela basically blows it up, tells Dom about the extra vote, and that they're gunning for him. And so this is where Angela basically blows up any remaining possibility of doing it. And I wonder, what do you think Angela was thinking at that point? Because
I didn't get this. I was super frustrated with her at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Except that, again, the fact that like we knew Dom had these idols, like it seemed difficult enough, which isn't what her reasoning was,
mm-hmm.
that I didn't, as the episode progressed and there were so many more interesting things, it was like, I mean, I sort of forget my state of mind at that point. All I remember is, my notes were just like, this seems like a dumb thing to do, to like go run to Dominic. Like,
and he even laughs to the camera afterwards about how, like, I can't believe she just told me that. Like, why would she?
Right.
And I mean, it's
doesn't make any sense to anyone. Yeah.
Well, it's like she is deliberately trying to be, get to the finale, but not like get to the final. But does she think that she had a chance to beat Wendell and Dom? I just don't, I'm not sure how she would think that. And maybe she's just assuming better third place than fourth or fifth.
I mean, there is nothing better. There's no reason to be that.
And, right. It's anyway. But yeah. And then,
knowing this is where the rule change, like, when I said that, hey, to be fair to Angela, like she had a chance because had she beat Wendell and Fire, but she didn't know that at this point.
Right. Yeah.
This is like literally setting herself up to be in the final three with those two, which is the same thing Laurel was doing. Like the fact that both of them were under this impression that that was a good idea is what allowed Dom and Wendell to get into the final four with two people who thought they wanted to be in the final three with them.
Yeah.
And who ultimately were going to lose to them. And it was silly on both of their parts. And so I guess that's why it's hard for me to like really bash Angela on this when Laurel is being equally as obtuse to who's going to win. And they both just seem to want to get to the finals. So.
Yeah. So in any event, Jonathan does then go and tell Laurel about the extra vote anyway. She seems at this point to act like she understands she does need to finally make a move. It does seem like we know there's the idols, but we also know that they would rather not have to play them if they don't have to, right? But so Dom and Wendell consult. My thought going into tribal council was that Dom should basically be going in planning to play his idol and only back off if he's really confident. That's what I was thinking at this point. But in any event, this is where we begin. Is Jonathan really in trouble? Sebastian says yes. Dom doesn't buy it. And then Dom basically lays out that he knows everything. He knows what everybody's talking about. He knows everybody's secrets. And he reveals his knowledge of the whole plan in just a big power move. It's like, if you guys thought you were doing anything without my knowledge, you're mistaken.
Yes.
And I thought that was fantastic. And then he, pulls out basically both his idols. And this is where he does the Fredo, you broke my heart thing to Jonathan, which I only really mentioned because explicitly one of the jury kind of whispers that he's like the Godfather. because he's just basically saying to Donathan's like, look, I've been honest with you all along, man. I don't know why you're trying to turn on me like this. And I loved, like, he ended up apologizing for it later, and I could understand that because just in the sense that while he was really kind of playing for the cameras more than the jury in that whole bit.
Right.
Now he was trying to basically bluff his way through so as to not have to use his real idol, right? He's trying to make himself seem all powerful so that they would give up, essentially, and not make him use his real idol.
Yes.
Which, you know, I mean, that's a reasonable move. And honestly, he almost pulled it off, right? Like, I mean, it was a tie except for Laurel, right? It almost won even with this. But I also think it was interesting, and I mean, we'll come to that he did feel like he understood that he ruffled some feathers more than he intended with some of that stuff. So he does all that, and then Wendell pulls out his idol too. And this is where any plan just completely falls apart, because it was completely dependent on this idea that they might be able to blindside someone, which is pretty hard to do when you have people in your alliance going around telling everybody everything. So I have in my notes, this is pretty great, just because whatever was going to happen, I was really enjoying the antics. And I'm just thinking they would have, like, the only way this still works is if they have enough reason to believe that Dom is playing a fake idol, that they're willing to risk it.
Right.
And that's tough, right? Like, I have tried to imagine being in that position, and it's like,
well, especially when two of them don't really want to vote for Dom.
Right, yeah.
Like, let's not take that out of the equation. Like, Angela and Laurel weren't exactly, like, pumped about getting rid of Dom. So, I mean, you can just look at they voted in a block of 4.
Well, they wouldn't have needed Laurel if Sebastian and Angela were with them. Like, Donathan, Sebastian, and Angela didn't need Laurel because Sebastian had his extra vote.
Right. True. Yeah, but Angela also went and told them everything. Right. Which is why it was silly of hers. But yeah, but for these back 4 votes, it was the 4 of them voted in a block, so it didn't, like, that's why it was just, it's hard to get so down on Angela, because Laurel was equally complicit. Like, the 2 of them voted with those 2 guys for the final 4 votes.
Mm-hmm.
And so it didn't matter who played idols when or where. Like, and they weren't, I mean, they might have paid lip service at times to, oh, well, they have idols and this, but no, Angela and Laurel wanted to go to the end with those 2, and they made decisions to set that up. That was ultimately just a bad strategy. Like you said, how do you sit there and say at the end, yeah, I was a part of all these strategic decisions that brought 2 people stronger than me to the end. Okay, that doesn't seem like a good idea. I'm glad you were a part of that, but you were wrong. You're not going to win.
Yeah. And so we have poor Donathan at this point ending up being the only person who actually still votes for Dominic. Even Sebastian ended up voting. Let's see, Sebastian, did he have?
He voted for Dawn.
Yeah.
Not Dominic.
Right. And so Donathan voted for Dominic.
Yes.
Sebastian voted for Donathan.
Correct. Yeah.
And but everyone else voted for Sebastian. So.
Yeah, the block of 4.
Yeah, and I wrote in all capitals in my note that Sebastian didn't use his extra vote. Because why? Well, I don't know. What? Not that it would have made a difference in this case, but he voted for the wrong person, so he couldn't have known.
Well, he couldn't have voted for the right person because it was him.
Right. Well, but I just mean, at the very least, if he had stuck with Donathan's plan and voted for Dominic, it would have been 3-4 and closer.
Yeah, true.
You know, so he literally made it worse for himself by voting against the only person who wasn't voting for him. And so at this point, Prost actually shares with us that 6 of 7 cursed relics have stayed cursed.
That is funny.
Yeah.
All right, keep talking. I'm feeding my dog real quick.
That's all right. So after the tribal council, we went right to the next immunity challenge, which was an obstacle course with puzzle pieces. Wendell was the first to start the puzzle, followed by Laurel, but Wendell wins again. And I was saying, you know, he and Dom are really dominating here. Wendell is cool and strategic. Dom with the social power moves. You know, not that we didn't know this going into the finale, but it's just, you know, it's continuing to be those two on top and everybody else with a far behind. And so, you know, here we are at 5 with Dom and Wendell each having real idols, and Wendell is immune from the challenge. So Wendell talks a little bit about maybe needing to make a move and try to outsmart Dom. Dom talks about his frustration about being unable to decisively pull ahead of Wendell. And talks about, like, Angela's not a threat. And I think we understand why he feels that way, because the only threat there might have been against him was spoiled by her coming and telling him about it. So that doesn't seem like someone who's going to backstab you now. So Donathan is the obvious vote in that context. Donathan at this point is doing anything he can, but he says he hopes that he can keep going by promising Dominic that he would take Dom to the final 3 if he can. And this is where we have an interesting insight from Dominic, talking about it being a snap call from Donathan. Like, if I save you, would you bring me to the final 3? And Donathan basically just says yes immediately without even like considering it or thinking through it. And Dominic basically says, well, it's probably a bluff, because he didn't even seem to think about it. It seemed like he was just instantly telling me whatever I wanted to hear without any real thought behind it.
Right.
And so that's something I don't think I can depend on. But at this point, he's thinking that maybe Laurel is a threat. Now that she's realized a little bit more clearly what was happening, except that she also still, I think in the previous vote, the Sebastian vote, I'll give her the credit that I think she only ended up voting for Sebastian because she was fooled by the idol talk and just figured it would be futile to vote for Dom.
You may be right. It's just really hard to give her the benefit of the doubt when she's always had an excuse of why it's not the time. And that just felt like her most recent excuse.
Well, agreed, except only in the context that in the, before this vote and before the Sebastian vote and after, she seemed actually kind of mad at Wendell and Dom about the whole thing. And so I think in that context, if she thought she had a chance to successfully get out one of them, I think she would have, and that her mistakes were basically made by not making a move soon enough, and now she really doesn't have any good moves. And this is where we actually have Laurel in confessional finally recognizing I had opportunities to flip that I didn't take, and now I am at their mercy. And it's like, yes, correct. Exactly. Yeah. That's what Donathan has been trying to tell you for a week now. Dom and Wendell are kind of grilling her to kind of say like, well, would you put Donathan on the jury over one of us if you had that choice? Or would you try to take one of us out? And, she basically again says, oh, sure. Yeah, I would vote out Donathan before you guys. And they're skeptical and should be, because at this point, we know from her confessional that at least that's what she says she would do if she had that choice.
Yep.
Dom and Wendell are plotting because that's what they do. Dom specifically says he wants to bring a non-factor to the final three. And he's talking to Wendell and saying, he wants it to be between the two of them. Wendell wants to make a move. And then I'm like, but what move? I mean, voting out Dominic, if you could, is like the only real move left. And you kind of can't anymore. So what other move is available? And this is where the finale basically reached the stage where everyone's arguments shift to the point where you have to try to pitch yourself as not a threat so you can go forward. Persuade the people who get to make the choice. Is like, you should bring me because I won't win, knowing that somehow you would have to then try to turn it around and make a case in the final. So we get Wendell lets Dom. Let's see. I think we're at tribal council again already. Am I? No, we're not at the immunity challenge yet.
The immunity. I mean, you're going.
Yeah. So the
play for a high level.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. It's because it's been a while, so I'm having to read through my notes to even really remember the details of what happened.
I know. I mean, but it is. Yeah, it is because you're actually reading it that way. Your tone is almost like remembering as you read.
Yeah. And, I mean, that is 100% what is happening. I am not going to pretend otherwise.
Wendell talked to Dom about this.
Yeah. Right. But so in any case, let's say, so it's the last time that either of them can use an idol. And wait, did I skip a bunch of stuff? What happened here? No, okay. Right. So Wendell's immune. They both have real idols. So it's just a case of well, what are we going to do from here? Dom gets to play his idol for himself first. Wendell plays his idol for Laurel, saying it's about loyalty. And this is, again, kind of the key that we talked about earlier that ultimately was probably the deciding factor, right? Now, things could have played out differently if Wendell had saved Donathan that way. Would Donathan have rewarded that in the same way? Would it have still ended up a tie if it was Laurel on the jury instead of Donathan? Hard to know, right? I mean, we can't really know for sure how that all works, but ultimately it results in Donathan being voted out, and he said he's a very good sport about it, despite having spent the last couple of tribal councils pretty frustrated how things were going. And apparently in the live show, we get an update where Sia shows up again and decides to give Donathan $10,000 to help take care of his family, which is nice. And I guess it's always just a little bit surreal because, this bit and the part with her in the previous season, I had no idea who she was when she came out before. And Jeff Probst was like, "Oh, this is actually Sia." And I'm like, okay, she's wearing a weird wig. I don't get this. And so, I mean, I'm glad that, she seems like she's obviously successful. I know who she is now through this, but it's weird that she's just a big enough fan that she just decided to involve herself.
Yeah. I mean, it still baffles me that you don't know who Sia is just through normal pop culture, but if you don't pay attention to that stuff, you don't pay attention to that stuff.
You know, certain celebrities do rise above the threshold where I start to notice, but her first peak above that threshold for me was when she was on Survivor, the Survivor finale a couple seasons back.
Yeah.
And I mean, the truth is, I was actually having this conversation with someone recently, talking about 80s music and that I like 80s music, but they were kind of mentioning it as the nostalgia thing. And it's like, well, except that like, I didn't really listen to 80s music as a kid, like when it was new. Like I've never in my life been to actually current pop music. Been like, I started liking 80s music later when it was already old. Anyway.
Did you only figure out who that guy Kanye West was when Rick and Morty wrote a birthday song for him?
No, I was aware of Kanye West sooner than that. But if nothing else, there was I already knew who he was, but there was a South Park episode several years ago that would have alerted me to that before Rick and Morty. But I did actually know who he was already. See, I know some people, and the more they rise to social media infamy, the more likely I am to have heard of them.
Yes.
But anyway, we get to the point where Donathan is eliminated. We have the final immunity challenge is standing on the wobbly balance beam and stacking, and first to get to 6.
I wanted to say we got sort of sidetracked, but the one thing I did want to say about that previous tribal council with Wendell playing his idol for Laurel, when he full well knew they were all voting for Donathan, was, it changes the calculation a little bit of like when you say who knows what would happen had he saved Donathan. Like he didn't save Laurel. They had already decided not to vote for Laurel.
Right.
He really just threw her like a treat.
Right. But no, and I think that's an excellent observation.
Yeah.
Because in theory, like if what he wanted was to save Donathan, then the whole thing would have played out differently. It wasn't just a matter of, but it was a matter of like, I have a thing that I can give to one person to make them feel good about me. And I'm choosing to give it to Laurel.
Right. So it's not like he was like, I'm saving Laurel, so you all need to vote for Donathan. Like that didn't happen. They all agreed to vote for Donathan, and he was like, well, I don't want to waste this thing. And rather than just be an arrogant jerk and be like, I have an idol I can put in my pocket and walk away, he was like, Laurel, I play it for you. Like it was very smooth on his part, which you did acknowledge, but he only really had 2 choices because it wasn't like he used who he was going to save to leverage votes. He waited till he decided and then picked from the other 2 who he thought was more valuable to give it to. That was what I wanted to kind of add to that.
No, so, I think that's a good point. I definitely do.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, it was yet another example of the smart play that he managed pretty much all season.
Which is why he won. I mean, in that sense, he literally had nothing to lose there.
Yeah.
Unless there was some scenario where Dom, and Angela ended up in the final 3, and she was the deciding vote, and she was like, well, you gave your idol to Laurel. But I don't even think that would have happened. Like, I don't think he had anything to lose here.
Right. Yeah. So in any event, Donathan was eliminated. We moved on to Final 4. And again, we kind of jumped right to the final immunity challenge. And this is where we learn about the rule change, where the winner gets to pick one person to be definitively safe. And then the other 2 will definitely do a fire making challenge, and as opposed to only doing a fire making challenge if it's a 2-2 tie, which is what they've done in the past, and it frequently ended up that way, right? We've often had tiebreaker challenge going in to the final, but having it be like there's no way to avoid it is interesting.
Yes.
We kind of talked about that already. Let's see. We had it was a pretty tense challenge because there was lots of the sort of reversals that are why they love this type of challenge for this point in the season. Because you have someone who seems like maybe they're going to win, they're so close, but then it falls and they have to start all over, and means that even the person who was going slow and steady and was way behind everybody else could still win because everyone else could suddenly drop their whole stack, and then got lots of dropping. It was all pretty good. But ultimately, Dominic wins. And it was good for him because, having lost the last couple of challenges, and he's been looking for trying, to avoid being completely outshone by Wendell.
Yep.
Outshone. I don't know. What do you think?
I think. So at this point, where my headspace was at was, I liked Dominic, but I had really started to build a fandom for Wendell. Just the way that he was executing and maneuvering himself, I really wanted him to win. And which is part of why, again, the new rule excited me, is because I thought at this point that Wendell was done. I thought that Dom would choose to vote against him, and so would Laurel and Angela to join him, and Wendell would go home. And that Dom would ultimately win the season, which I would have been satisfied with, but I was rooting for Wendell.
Right.
And that it's part of what made me so excited about the end of it was like, oh, he's still got a chance. And then, and it made that fire-making challenge like even more, not that I, disliked Angela, but I was really rooting for him to beat Angela and to go in there and beat Dom head-to-head, and for Laurel to get just absolutely shut out, just like it happened. But,
yeah. I think my headspace here was, I was feeling almost equally excited for the prospect of either Dom or Wendell. Like, I was really feeling like I could be completely happy with either of them winning.
Yep.
And that's actually, I think, part of why I was so kind of delighted for it to actually be a tie. Not just because it's an interesting wrinkle that hadn't really happened before, but just because, I was kind of like equally rooting for either of them. So that's great. It's kind of fun. But in any event, it's kind of neat, the idea that they all go to Ghost Island together this time, where they can each kind of try to plead their cases. And Dom gets a secret message. I'm actually forgetting at the moment what his secret message was. Wendell, but the whole dynamic ultimately is about Dom knows he is not going to pick Wendell, and Wendell doesn't, honestly even ask him to. Like, when he gets his moment, he basically kind of says, okay, we both know you're not going to pick me. That would be dumb for you to do so. Why would you?
Oh, so, Dominic note so I'm looking at my notes. What his note said was the new rule.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay.
That's what it was. That's why you probably don't have it, because it was what happened. He was told that
because
here's how it works.
In my notes, I have a note about the rule change before the challenge actually happens. So I think that rule was explained at least to us before the challenge.
Oh, no. Sorry. Yeah, no, different. It was a different final. I read my notes too quick. He got to pick what the urn was for the, like...
Oh, right. That's what it was.
Yeah.
I recall feeling vaguely disappointed in that, just because it was not really meaningful except for superstitious value.
Right. And so, yeah, my notes were like, oh, Dom chooses for final tribal council, and I just jumped to conclusions. But now reading the rest of it, he got to pick with an urn. It was
right. But I like that, Wendell really didn't even push Dom to pick him, because there was a mutual respect there of like, well, if I was in his position, I sure wouldn't pick him. I wouldn't expect him to pick me. The fact that, part of what I respect about him is that he's not someone who's dumb enough to make that decision. And so I liked that, and the sort of the as a given that Wendell wouldn't get picked. And so Dom is in a position of choosing between Laurel and Angela based on who he thinks has a better chance of beating Wendell. And he's fortunate in the sense that Angela and Laurel are essentially in the same boat of agreeing. Each of them would like to be the one in the final three for, guaranteed, but they understand that if Wendell is there also, it diminishes their own chances. So it's like they're kind of all on the same page that whoever isn't safe, they hope will be able to beat Wendell, but they would each kind of like to be the one who's safe.
Right. Well, and I also love the little aside where they essentially edited out. The best way I could describe it is like Dominic like journaling via interview. Basically just like spilling all of his thoughts.
Yeah.
When he's like, well, thinking about who could beat Wendell, I probably have the best chance. So should I go against Wendell? And if I go against Wendell and beat him, I'm essentially assured a victory.
Yeah.
And they made that sound like it was like a legitimate option. Like it was definitely never a legitimate option.
I kind of hoped that he would have done it.
I mean, it would have been great, but he was never going to do that.
Part of why I was actually hoping that he might do it is because I actually thought that even though I myself found myself rooting between Wendell and Dom mostly equally, I kind of thought that Wendell had a much better chance with the jury. And so I was thinking to myself, it seems quite possible that if Wendell ends up in the final three with Dom, Dom loses to Wendell. And if he is saying neither Angela nor Laurel are going to beat Wendell at firemaking,
and I'm not going to beat him in the end.
In the end,
the
only way to beat him completely is to ensure that he's not in the final, and I'm the one that feels like I can do that. I don't think Wendell or Laurel can. And so on that basis, it's certainly risky, but I kind of loved how gutsy it would have been to do that. Now, ultimately, he didn't decide to do that, I think, because he felt like maybe the jury wasn't going to be quite so lopsided, and he ended up right in the sense that it was, it was a tie. So,
I mean, I think it was a good thought for him to have.
Yeah.
However, it was highly unlikely that he was going to do that. I mean, the risk reward, the reward was strong, but it wasn't like the reward didn't exist if either one of them happened to beat Wendell or he did compete against Wendell. He has two chances to beat Wendell that way. Either someone beats him in fire or he beats him in the jury. As opposed to just one thing of fire, like to boil all of it down to fire. Why put yourself in that position, even if you feel like you're good? Because clearly Wendell was also good at that. It would be different if like Laurel was the favorite to win and, you knew you could crush her in fire.
Right. Well, and it's also conceivable that even if he decided to do the firemaking challenge and then beat Wendell, that the jury members would go, what the hell did you do that for? That was the dumbest thing ever. It was so risky. Why did you do that? Like I could imagine some of them being harsh with him for that reason. But, so ultimately he didn't do it, but I kind of loved that he thought about it.
Yeah. Well, that's why I called it like journaling via interview.
Sure. Yeah.
He's spilling out his thoughts, which were cool thoughts, which I loved it. But the fact that I'm sure he had a bunch of other scenarios that he also gave out, and they were like, oh, this one sounds like really cool. Like, let's put this, like it's a possibility for the audience.
Well, and good Survivor players have to do that. They have to talk through what the various options are. They have to say, okay, well, let's consider what are the choices, right? And he could decide to do it himself. And so it's worth talking through that. And I think ultimately he decided too risky. So didn't do it, but it's good that he thought about it.
Right, especially to it being down to what I need to do is choose the person who can beat Wendell at fire. That is how I win this game. And he wasn't narrow-minded enough to say it's only choosing out of this group of who can beat Wendell. It's let's look at everyone who could beat Wendell at fire, which is me, and which one makes the most sense for all these reasons. So yeah, smart player. I would have been happy had he won. I'm glad he was, in the end and second. I thought he did a phenomenal job. So this was an example of that. So,
so in any event, we have Dom in that boat. He gets to pick between the urns, and I wrote in my notes that I thought it was kind of fun in the sense that it's kind of a psych out move by the producers. You know what I mean? Like, let's give you one more choice that we pretend is meaningful, but really just invites you to think about all these times that people screwed up this decision.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of fun, even though I would have maybe preferred, if they were going to have some other wrinkle here, that it would be, more than just symbolic. But in any event, I liked as they go to the tribal council that, Dom and Wendell are still kind of expressing their mutual respect. And in the event, let's see. So, he picks Laurel to be safe so that Angela will, do the fire making, but it's really not even close. So Angela is eliminated, and we go preparing for the final. Wendell's confident he can win if he brings his A game. Laurel knows that she is the underdog and is like, playing has been a transformative experience for her. Wants jury to know the moves she was making, working from the bottom on the tribe as the tribe underdog, saved Dom and Wendell multiple times. And my note here is essentially what other people said, which was, you shouldn't have. You don't get to take credit for making a move that results in you being against stronger players. I mean, it's like, yes, they are here because of you. That's a mistake, not something to take credit for.
Yep.
But anyway, Dom has a good point in terms of knowing going into the jury that he has to be careful that his edge isn't too sharp. And I liked just the turn of phrase there. Okay, so that brings us to the final tribal council. I don't know that we need to go through all of the details, but I'm kind of, because I've just sort of rescanning my notes here. And I think we've talked about a lot of the overall ideas here anyway, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest ideas were Laurel was mostly ignored. There was some criticism of Dom's handling of that second to last.
Yeah.
Or third to last, or whatever. Whichever.
Yeah, we're pulling out the idols.
Right. And
power move element of it.
Power move one frustrated Sebastian and a couple of others.
Yeah.
But otherwise, yeah, I mean, it was ultimately mostly just people talking about Wendell and Dom's games.
Yeah. I really liked Chris more in this final tribal council, I think, than I actually liked him at any point in the actual season. Where he just kind of he wanted to know between Dom and Wendell's, like, who do you think was the real mastermind between the two of you? And I think he asked knowing that it's always going to be a combination. It wasn't like one or the other, it's the two of them together, right? But just given that the whole thing that had happened with him and Dom, to see him actually finishing with giving a lot of respect to Dom, I think was nice to see. He ended up voting for him too.
Yep.
And it was interesting to discuss, though, that it brought up the question of lots of people had relationships with the Dom and Wendell show, but asking the question, those of you who had a relationship with the pair, which one of them was it that brought you in? And it seems like it was actually fairly, you know, it was a split. It wasn't all one way or the other.
Right.
Michael, once again, proved very eloquent and coherent and insightful and acted almost like the jury's unofficial foreman throughout the whole thing.
He has really been amazing.
Yeah, he's like they better bring him back for another season. He's great.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah, they talked a little bit about the theatrics and that sort of thing. Laurel made a valiant effort to try to say that at any of the points where she could have tried to get Dom or Wendell out would have been a worse moment for her to do it in some ways. But I mean, I don't think anyone's buying that at this point, just because it's kind of like, well, yeah, but then at least you would have done something. You know, whereas right now you seem to be making the case that your clever strategy has resulted in you losing. So anyway, yeah, so it was all pretty good. But it was very shocking and surprising when they do all the votes and then Probst is saying, all right, now I'm going to read the votes. And everyone's immediately like, wait, what? And, you know, like I didn't get it right away, but figured out fairly quickly, I think and I mean, not that it wasn't explained anyway, but before he finished reading the votes, I just figured out like the only possible reason they would have to read the votes right away is if there's a tie.
Yeah.
Because they have to do something else, right? Now, it occurred to me that you could have had the tiebreaker be in the live show. That could have been interesting. But that said, I could imagine them not wanting to risk having something awful happen during the live show.
Well, especially since, you know, and I just double checked this, the filming dates on this were June and July of last year. And the finale aired like the last week in May. I mean, essentially a year later.
Yeah.
So you are risking a lot.
Right.
Until then, you know.
Right. But as it was, it's the unusual situation where even the people, like usually, even the people who voted don't necessarily know what the total or the result was going to be. But in this case, Laurel definitely knew because it was totally up to her.
True.
Yeah, but in any event, so it was an even split. First time in 36 seasons to have a tie in the final. And I mean, even though I'm sure it has always been what would happen if there was a tie. I mean, because I think we've even actually talked about the idea of sometimes it was weird when they're deciding how many people are going to be on the jury, of like having an even number on the jury, because then what do you do if there's a tie? But at the same time, it seems like a very straightforward way to resolve it, which is to have the one person who wasn't a member of the tie make the final decision.
Right.
And I thought
the next jury member.
Yeah.
You know?
And to have it be Laurel and to have it just feel like the other shoe dropping for the karma of him giving her the idol before, even when, as you pointed out, it didn't really matter. But I don't know. I just found that very satisfying regardless.
Agreed.
And Wendell is just such a class act too. You know what I mean? In the sense of just, he's so cool. He's just very confident and, you know, but he seems like a good guy. He's a nice person. It's very emotionally satisfying to have him win.
Yes.
Yeah. I liked Dom a lot too. I would have also been happy with him, but it's hard to have any objection to Wendell winning.
Well, and I think that's part of why I'm so excited about what they decided to do with that final tribal, or not the penultimate tribal, is that it left us in this scenario of watching two greats go against each other and being super satisfied with the result, because they they had the tie. They had, you only have a tie when you have two strong players at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's the reason there hasn't been a tie, is that there's not been a lot of occasions when the top two have decided to go against each other.
Right. Yeah.
And so by eliminating that decision making from them and putting it in the hands of one of them, that's what created all of this. And that's why I really hope they keep it.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's such a dramatic increase in the likelihood that you get two strong players at the end, because the most you can do for the one strong player to eliminate the other is to send them to fire making. But if they're really stronger, they might win anyway. And as exactly what happened here. And we could just see that. You could imagine that playing out in largely the same way in future combinations.
Right. And I love what's going to happen, though, is that those strong players are going to enter that calculus a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
And they're going to be like, well, I have option one of, like, we continue to stay together, and no matter what, like, either I put him in the fire making challenge or he puts me in, and we get a chance, so I get two chances to get there, basically. I get the final immunity, and I get to, if I don't win that, I get the chance to make fire. Do I want to be paired with this person with the chance that I'm definitely going to go against them, as opposed to just paying lip service to it?
Right. Yeah.
Or do I want to turn early? And if I turn early, do I expose myself? And then I don't even make it to the end. And so you're going to have those guys, as opposed to just like mounting together. Now they got to consider, when do they actually turn on each other? Or are they really, truly willing to go to the end?
No, it's a great change. And
totally
again, like there were elements of what happened that obviously we didn't predict, but given that in a lot of respects, even almost the order people went out in, we were pretty close to predicting exactly what happened. But there were wrinkles about how it happened that were different. Right. But I found it a very entertaining finale. Very happy with the result. And that's, I don't necessarily feel like this season, like, I feel like early on in this season, I wasn't necessarily, like, I was enjoying it, but I wasn't thinking of it as one of the best seasons. I don't think it started out quite as good as some seasons have.
Right.
But,
well, there was too much turmoil and mix up, and good players to go early, and it was sort of disorienting to figure out who was who. Which didn't make it bad. It just didn't. It was hard, like you said. It was hard to like solidify and say this is a great season.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, very satisfying conclusion though. So I have some notes from the live reunion show. It was fun seeing Wendell's 2012 Survivor audition interview, especially just he looks like, obviously he's the same guy, but he's very different presentation of himself.
Yes, because he's like 6 years younger or whatever, 5 years. Yeah,
his hair is very different, and he's like in a suit in looks like a law office or something like that. I don't even remember where he was sitting.
Yeah.
But in any event,
the other thing that I thought was interesting about the reunion is that because of how cool this end episode was, it ate a bunch of time out of the 3 hour block that's supposed to be like 2 hours episode, 1 hour reunion.
Right.
I think the episode ate 15 to 20 minutes at least out of the reunion.
Well, it was interesting because I ended up watching on CBS, like the CBS like streaming service thing.
Right.
And the entirety of the live reunion show was only something like 18 minutes.
Yeah.
When you take out all the commercials and stuff like that.
Right. So when I was watching it on DVR, that's why I said I think it took like 20 plus minutes out of the reunion show just on standard time. And so then you've got like 35 minutes of reunion show, and you take out, well, I guess they ran 50-50 on commercials. That seems a little excessive, but either way.
Well, and then they used
a ton of reunion show.
They used a big chunk of the already short reunion show to talk about Kevin Hart's new show too. So That face that you just made was not what went on the stream because I was making sound, but I agree with you. Which is a little bit of a, yeah.
Cool. You're going to do another summer obstacle show of some sort. Yeah.
Yeah. It's fine. I do like the whole pitch that it's kind of like American Ninja Warrior or Ultimate Ninja Warrior. I don't even remember. It's kind of like that, except that it's sort of explicitly designed as sort of like not for just extreme athletes. Like it's supposed to be like something that anyone can do. I like that angle, even though I don't think I'm going to watch it.
Yeah, I mean the pitch of the show is fine. Mm-hmm. Kevin Hart is hilarious. I think he's
a funny guy for sure.
Yeah, it's not about that. It was just sort of an odd cross promotion that they utilized.
It's so weird to use so much of the live Survivor reunion to pitch this other show.
Right. I mean,
must share some producers in common. I'm thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like my notes of Survivor of the reunion show were Wendell's audition, Donathan's check, Kevin Hart's promotion, and David and Goliath preview. They didn't really talk to anybody else.
Well, they did have Dom specifically say where he wished in hindsight that he would have challenged Wendell for the fire, especially because he knew as soon as it came down to Laurel's vote that she was going to vote for Wendell. And so I loved that they gave Dom a print of, so the shot that they gave Dominic of him making weird flirty eyes at Wendell was exactly the scene that I had called out at the time of going, there's a weird energy between these two at this scene. It's kind of funny. And so the fact that they actually revisited it and gave him a big print of him doing that, I thought was really funny and felt a little bit validating. In the sense that
I actually, you're right. I felt that for you as well, because I know I was sort of minimally critical of that because I didn't feel the same thing. But then when they put it as a print, I was like, yeah, right. I can see it.
Yeah. So in any event, let's say they do briefly talk to Michael, just saying like, how did you get so mature? Because it's basically everyone kind of saying, you don't seem like you're 18. So what's up with that?
Yeah.
And he basically just says he was raised right. Sure. I mean,
which is the thing.
Good answer too. That's the right mature answer to say too. He's got it all. I thought it was super weird that Probst brings out James and Eric, where he wants to talk about the idea that their so-called dumbest moves are really only sort of dumb in retrospect. But what he kind of ends up saying is that James's move was really only dumb in retrospect and Eric's was actually dumb. That's kind of what he actually said.
I didn't pick up on that. And obviously, it was so long ago that I can't remember what they said about that.
I only remember because I made the note of it, but
I could see that though. I mean, it's not wrong.
Well, but what he's talking about, which I thought was interesting, and I wish they could have maybe spent enough time to actually talk about it in meaningful detail, is just the idea that it's only dumb because it didn't work. You know what I mean? Like they thought they were making a gamble and it didn't work, which is why we call it a dumb mistake. But if it had worked, would we be hailing it as an amazing smart move? Now, to some extent, the reason that you don't necessarily take that as a given, well, you go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think that almost proves the point that Probst was talking about. Like James's would have been more likely to be viewed that way in hindsight had he not gotten voted out. Like Eric not getting voted out for handing away his idol wouldn't have been a genius move. It would have been like, well, you were lucky.
Yeah.
Whereas James would have been like, way to hold strong, and so I feel like he's justified in that way, but I don't know. I mean,
yeah. Yeah. In any event, you can also make the case that part of making that gamble is accurately reading the people involved. So if you make what seems in the abstract like an extremely risky decision, but it works, it's probably because you accurately read and predicted what the other people were going to do. So you do get credit. But when you do a dumb decision and you were wrong, it's like, well, yeah, I mean, but it's because you failed to anticipate what was actually happening. But in any event, it was weird that given that they had said earlier in the finale that 6 of 7 had remained cursed at that point, they said it was 7 of 11 that remained cursed at the end, which I was feeling like, so does that mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess the idols used successfully, including the fake, probably all count as
Yeah, they must have counted all of everything that those guys did at the end there.
Yeah.
And only tagged the urn as the 7th.
Yeah, that's got to be it. But in any event, I thought it was interesting just having Kellen talk about how rationally you can understand and say that's all superstition. There's no such thing as a real curse. But when you're under pressure in that sort of a situation, it's hard to really completely dismiss it. And I think that's kind of probably true for a lot of people, is even if you sort of could say, I don't actually believe in magic curses or luck, you are probably in a state of psychological stress where your brain is going to be reaching out for anything that it can kind of try to cling to.
Yep.
What do you think about the next season preview, David versus Goliath?
It's fine.
Yeah.
I don't think it's dumb, and I'm not like, oh my gosh, this is going to be the greatest hitting again. I mean, it's just a way to carve it up. It's nothing.
It's going to be interesting to see how they spin it, I think, because at least at first glance, just given how it's sort of almost presented, like even almost like the concept is a little bit like heroes versus villains, in the sense that it's almost like meatballs with the regular kids camp and then the rich kids camp across the lake. You know what I mean? It's like, are the Goliath tribe going to be pitched as actually good people, or is it going to be totally they're the ones who had it all and they're against the underdog?
Well, I mean, just considering some of the people that they had, I mean, they've got the one of the like policemen who was like famous from like a rescue during the Hurricane Irma as one of the Goliaths, so they're not. I mean, they're taking good people, so I can't imagine they're going to pitch them as bad people.
Well, and I guess
fairly advantaged, but that's that feels like part of it.
I just can't help but wonder if the theme is ultimately going to be like every other season that has a weird theme, where it's a little muddled to begin with and it becomes meaningless 2 episodes in when they have a mix-up.
That's how I feel, which is why I was kind of like, when you asked me how I thought, I was like, well, I mean, it's fine. I mean, it's just a way to carve them up. I mean, that's why I feel that way. It's because I don't feel like that theme is going to like carry on. I think what's more interesting to me is that we're now stacking up a couple of seasons of all new players so that we can get some new, when we go back to like returning player stuff, we've got some new blood in there. We've got some new dynamics to the game.
Yeah.
And, and people are playing, because you play differently when there's a returning player. Like, that's just legitimate because they've got a lot of things figured out. There is a distinct difference in having seen 39 episodes of Survivor or 39 seasons of Survivor and having played on 2 seasons. Like, you are distinctly advantaged, especially if you've gone far. because we sit here, we armchair this all the time, but you and I both are we know that put in that situation, it becomes much more difficult.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, and that's just kind of understanding these things, right? Like, because I think it is such a common thread through various seasons of Survivor where you have people who are super fans, many of them probably bigger fans than we, in the sense of being like obsessive about knowing everything about it, right?
Multiple watchings and all that kind of stuff.
Right. And nonetheless, people who spend a lot more time thinking about it, even than we do, who do a podcast, nonetheless find themselves out on the island going, this is so much harder than I thought. Because it's probably something that really, can't really be completely understood unless you've had a similar experience.
Right.
And in a lot of ways, it's probably completely unique. Like, even if you've had some sort of other, like, you could have had a traumatic survival experience, like in a wilderness, like maybe you could have been lost in the forest or something like that, right? You could have had other sorts of media experiences, but having all of those things combine is fairly unusual. You know what I mean? It's like hard to think of any other experience that someone would have just had that would really be the same as undergoing the stresses of food deprivation, sleep deprivation, the discomfort there, on top of having the cameras follow you around all the time, on top of playing a psychological competition for $1 million throughout. Right? I mean, what else is like that?
Right. No, I mean, and we've seen that because we've seen professional athletes go on who deal with the heightened competition and cameras following you everywhere, but not the deprivation and the psychological part of it. We've seen people go on there who've been in other game shows, which has the psychological, reality game shows with the psychological component and the cameras everywhere. But to combine all of them, like you said, if someone went in who had been in a deprivation situation, but not with the cameras and the psychological piece, they also don't equate everything. And sitting at home comfortable on our couch and recording a conversation on our laptops, like, that doesn't even equate. But
well, because we see all the time players who are good at one or even two of the three sort of legs of the tripod, so to speak, where maybe they're really good physically and they help out a lot at camp, but they drop the ball in the social game. Or you get someone who's the social butterfly making friends everywhere, but they just can't hack it with the challenges. It's like it takes a lot. And obviously you see people who sometimes manage to win without being strong at one of the three, but no one has ever won without being strong at least two of them. Right.
Just like a triathlon, you can be weak in one of the areas, but if you're not strong in the other two, you're not going to compete well. Yeah.
Well, so in any event, I'm glad we finally got to talk about this finale because I think it was a good one. Yes. And even if it was, a little delayed, maybe it'll just help everybody extend that good Survivor feeling a little bit longer to be reminded. Listening now, and but in the meantime, we'll be back next season to talk about David and Goliath when it happens. And in the meantime, you can check out Christiana Ellis or this YouTube channel to see some of the other stuff that we got going on. Like maybe we'll actually get back to our movie podcast at some point.
We'll do that this summer.
Yeah. So that'll do it for this episode. So thank you everybody for watching and or listening. And we'll be back for more Survivor next season.
Yay.